Breaking news on the Telegraph website as we speak, Kamal. Gordon Rayner is back in the Daily Tea studio. It's a hat trick for our Telegraph colleague because he's got a great story about the real cost, potentially, of Labour's plans to decarbonise the power grid.
And we'll also be talking about David Tennant, Doctor Who to many, who has told Kemi Badenoch, who is one of the most successful politicians of her generation, also happens, of course, to be a black woman, to shut up on the issue of women's rights. And he chucked in his wish as well that she did not exist for good measure.
And we're going to talk about the football, the Euros, England's disappointing performance, sleep-inducing. What's Gareth Southgate getting wrong? We're not going to comment. We're going to speak to Thom Gibbs.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed.
And me, Camilla Tominey.
Now, Camilla, before we kick off into this rich smorgasbord, a Swedish word, we've had this argument before, not German, of content for the Daily Tea today, a little round of applause, I believe, for you, Camilla. Where were you yesterday lunchtime? You had to rush off a little early in our podcast recording for a secret mission.
I went off to the Television and Radio Industries Club Awards, also known as the Trick Awards.
Absolutely, right up there with the Oscars.
And I only brought back a gong, Kamal. I tell you what, I never win anything. I have been nominated for things like Scoop of the Year. Okay, never win. I'm nominated for Scoop of the Year for revealing that Harry and Meghan were dating, got beaten by the story about Andrea Leadsom saying that she'd be a better PM than
Does it
Theresa
still hurt, Camilla? I can feel a little bit, just a little bit of bristling there.
I mean, if that isn't Scoop of the Year, what is? Anyway, I was there with Alistair Stewart. This was for an interview I did with him on GB News, which I know you love me mentioning, where I sat down with him and he told me that he had dementia. And he's a legendary broadcaster who's had to take a step back. And the good thing about it is, OK, I'm happy to win the award, which has currently got pride of place on my kitchen table. But it was about raising awareness about a condition that at the end of the day, this is nuts, but according to Dementia UK, will affect 1 in 2 people in the UK over the course of their lifetime. So he was with me. He came with his wife, Sal, who's equally adorable. And he was just so chuffed to be recognised. So it was lovely.
It's a really amazing interview, Camilla, really warm and thoughtful. And also, of course, giving publicity to dementia and as well making people aware of some of the issues that they may be dealing with. You know, many of us will have family and friends, and then ourselves may well have that condition.
Shall we speak to Gordon Rayner, G-Ray, as I like to call you? You're back in the Daily Tea. The utility player of this newspaper, can I say?
That is, no, hang on. I would say...
He can contribute, he can break scoops.
Gordon, you're far more than a utility player. You are a midfield general of the podcast. You're Michel Platini. You're not some
utility player an insult? It's not meant to be.
I was thinking of James Milner when he said that.
Is that a bad thing?
Might be.
Not a great thing.
Is it that you're a number 10? Does that help?
No, that doesn't help at all, Camilla.
Right.
Gordon, let's get on to the story.
Star striker, sorry. Gordon, you've got something great.
Yes, so this is a story about Darren Jones, who is the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, which means that if Labour do get into power, should that happen, he will be the number 2 at the Treasury, so he will be effectively in charge of public spending along with the Chancellor. Now, in March, he held a public meeting in Bristol, at which he was asked about Labour's plans for decarbonisation and their green energy investment policy, which, as you'll remember, was much talked about at around that time because Labour had originally said they were going to spend 28 billion a year on this policy. They then backtracked because they realised that was going to be unaffordable. And Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves said that they would scale it down to 4.7 billion a year. This has come up many, many times during the election campaign, as you know. Now, interestingly, Darren Jones was speaking at this event after that announcement was made to downgrade the amount of money that Labour were going to spend. He was asked how much this policy was going to cost. He said that £28 billion was, in his words, a tiny amount, and that it was actually going to cost hundreds of billions to put into force. Now, We don't know exactly where Labour would say that hundreds of billions of pounds is going to come from. They might argue that it'll come from private investment. But certainly it's very interesting that this policy that they've tried to sort of push this down away from the sort of discourse. I think every time it's mentioned, they try to just say, yes, well, obviously we've got our fiscal rules we're sticking to. But here you have a man who could very soon be a very important part of the Treasury, saying this decarbonisation by 2030 plan will cost hundreds of billions.
Shall we have a listen? You've got some audio, just to warn you. It is a bit crackly because it's been taken in the background of a meeting, but let's just have a listen to what he actually said.
So we're still absolutely committed to it. It's still one of the top 5 priorities, and it's going to be a huge amount of effort to get there. I think people have to move quite quickly. But a lot of the coverage in the news was about that specific 28, which, because journalists like sort of conflict, made it sound as if we basically jumped the whole thing, but we definitely haven't.
Because some people would say that like 28 billion isn't enough.
No, it's tiny.
Like I've got people who work
hundreds of billions of pounds we need.
And
Yeah.
and they say it's not enough. We actually need to spend more. And so I guess for younger people, we just need to know that there is hope, and that if there is a Labour government, that investment will be there because it's much needed.
Yeah, so I'm working on the manifesto at the moment because the team has to do all the maths. The Prime Minister seems to have said this evening there's not an election on May the 2nd, but it will come pretty soon. The manifesto will come out probably in week 2 of the 6-week election campaign, and because the decarbonising the power sector is a mission, there will be a whole chapter about all of this stuff. So you'll be able to see in more detail kind of the policy and the direction of travel that we'll have, which I think you'll welcome.
Well, Gordon, first of all, well done. I think that climate has been the dog that really hasn't barked enough during this campaign. It's really important for parties, I think, going into elections, particularly those that are in the lead in the polls and are probably going to form the next government, to make sure they get a mandate.
Yes.
And this is climate and the whole net zero plan, and whether Labour can hit their rather vaulting ambition to hit net zero by 2030, which is only 6 years away. And most experts say it's almost impossible to see how they're going to hit those targets. If you don't talk about it in the run-up to the campaign and make it clear what you're going to do and what it's going to cost, your mandate suffers when you then do, maybe in 2025 or 2026, as you've revealed here, Gordon, start loading on costs and saying, oh, well, actually, it's going to cost X, Y, and Z. As you say, I've been looking through the manifesto on what they've actually said about net zero. And after that 28 billion green investment plan, which they downgraded so hugely, the only two figures in the manifesto are 1.7 billion cost to set up this green energy business, which is a technology investment business. Yep. Quite hard to actually understand, I think, for most voters what exactly that will be doing, but it's to invest in green technology. And then 1.1 billion for what they call the Warm Homes Plan, which actually, although it's a net zero or a climate policy, or it's put in their climate chapter, is actually just helping people insulate their homes during the winter, which is probably a good thing. Gordon, why do you feel that we haven't had this big conversation about green issues, if they can be called that? They've sort of been headed off politically, haven't they? After the issues around low emission zones, no one dared step into it. And I think that has been a real missing part of this whole debate. And I think almost a little dishonest.
Yeah, I think there are probably two reasons. I think firstly, the most obvious thing is they're hugely expensive, and nobody really wants to have to talk about spending massive amounts of money when they're spending most of the election campaign saying there isn't really much money, and blaming, predominantly blaming the Tories for that. And the other thing is that I don't think it is a priority for people when they ask them, when they go and poll people on what they're worried about. They're worried about, the cost of living. They're worried about the NHS. They're worried about public services. I don't think people bring up net zero, the green economy, decarbonisation, the move to electric cars as a voting priority. So it's quite easy for the parties to just kind of ignore it because they're not going to be asked about it very much by people on doorsteps. So they can kind of just pretend that it's just something they'll deal with when the time comes.
I think it's also the arbitrary nature of setting that target. We must decarbonise by 2030. People are like, must we? Net zero. It becomes this thing. And then I think the electorate has woken up to the fact that they feel that it has impoverished them and made them poorer and colder because it's coming home to roost all of the green subsidies that have been put on energy bills that have already skyrocketed because of the war in Ukraine and other issues. I also think that people feel that it's one of those issues that now has become sacrosanct and put on a pedestal because of the whole Greta Thunbergization of it. And
That's not easy to say, Camilla.
No, I know.
No,
Did you notice? And Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. That if you say, I'm not sure about net zero by 2030, somebody starts shouting in your face, you're a climate change denier. No, hang on a minute. No, I'm not. I just cannot see the sense in people talking about decarbonising the power grid with no real plan that you've laid out of how it actually physically works. We're talking about decarbonising the power grid in 6 years' time. By the way, Labour or anybody else, what happens if it doesn't work? And can we please put a price on it? I mean, to be fair to Darren Jones, he may just be speculating. It's going to be of no surprise to anybody that it's going to cost many, many, many billions. I think the public are saying, we've just gone through a cost of living crisis. We're struggling to heat our homes as it is. Is this completely self-defeating? Yes, we recycle. We want to be green. If we can replace our cars with electrics, we will. But as Carla Denyer, the co-leader of the Greens, has admitted, even she can't afford to install a heat pump. Why are we expecting this of the electorate?
Cost of living, Camilla, is not necessarily in opposition to changes in, the way we approach the climate change issues. Like the Warm Homes Plan, that would actually reduce people's energy bills if we could actually insulate our homes. So our housing stock is some of the worst in the world for actually keeping warm over the winter. And so if you put it up as a kind of battle, there's cost of living or we do something about climate change, I think that's probably not quite where the public is. I think you're right, Gordon, it's not at the top of their mind. But if you're thinking about the future and what is the world going to look like in 50 years' time for our children and, the rest of the world, I think people are concerned about it and want to do the right thing.
But take the public with you. We've discussed this before.
Which is why we should have this conversation, which is why Gordon's story's so important.
The conversation's become rather toxified between you're either on the side of green or you're not on the side of green.
I'm not quite sure that it's true. I mean, some of the commentary might be like that, but I don't think if anyone questions net zero or the costs, they're called a climate change denier. I mean, Gordon, is that how the conversation's going? I'm just not sure, Camilla, everyone's quite as angry.
It goes a little bit like that on X and social media, to be fair.
Yeah, but we don't live there.
Look, I think what we have to take on board is that this could have implications for taxation, obviously, and we haven't really said that yet. If we're talking about high costs for something, we're probably going to be talking about either higher taxes or huge amounts of borrowing. We're already in a massive hole with public borrowing. We haven't paid for COVID yet. And I think that parties just need to be upfront with people. If let's say, Labour are planning on borrowing a lot of money to pay for this plan, they need to say that. And I think that's what people are asking for. They just want a bit of honesty.
Yeah.
And then they can make their minds up.
Yes.
I think that there is a way that it's been a little divided sometimes. There's almost a kind of, maybe not quite right versus left, but there's kind of one camp, which is the Greta Thunberg camp, and then there's kind of the other people who are just facing the costs. I thought that when David Cameron did the whole vote blue, go green, Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor and then in the early period of his prime ministership, was very big on net zero, said it could be an economic advantage to the United Kingdom. And I think there is a lot in that if we can get ahead of this technology, there are lots of jobs connected to it, and it could mean some real new industries for us as a country. And these are proper manufacturing industries, wind farm creation and technologies around net zero could be actually a new manufacturing base with real jobs attached. I think that's all good. And also for Conservatives, that rather quieter, we've talked about this, haven't we, Camilla, that rather quieter environmentalism of taking care of rural areas, farmers, communities working together, the National Trust, that whole area.
Keeping rivers clean, not banning, but reducing use of plastics.
I think, David, your point, well, no, Camilla, all of us about this, there's no debate, though, is there?
Why have you called
about
Gordon
this discussion?
David?
No, all of us. You, Camilla, as
know,
well.
you
Or did I say David?
said-
I don't know. Gordon, you wonderful person.
Look, I think what's interesting is you've just advocated for this policy. A lot of what you said, I think, is true. A lot of it makes sense. If this is this wonderful thing that we can take advantage of and that is going to bring jobs and is going to bring investment to the country, why are the parties so shy about talking about it? You know, this whole campaign, election campaign, has been full of negatives. It's been Rishi Sunak apologising for just about everything, and Keir Starmer being very sort of having this furrowed brow and saying it's going to be tough. And, you know, where is the optimism? Why are they not, if, as you say, that is the case, that it's this great opportunity for the country, why are they not saying that and going on these TV debates and saying, I'll tell you what's going to happen, we're going to do this green plan, is going to be amazing, and we're all going to have, you know, clean air, and we're all going to have warm homes, and your bills are going to go down. They're not saying that. Well, why are they not saying that? There has to be a reason.
I think the Uxbridge by-election is that reason, is that the public rejected the ultra-low emission zones in the Uxbridge by-election, and the politicians are running scared. The dishonesty within politics about tax, spend and policy, I think, will be one of the things that we'll be sitting here in a year's time saying, we said so, and the voter will say, you never said that before the election, and now you're putting the taxes up or you're putting borrowing. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's the IFS argument, isn't it? The Institute for Fiscal Studies saying if you look at all of the manifestos, they're not properly costed, and therefore you ask yourself, are they worth the paper they're written on? Gordon,
thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
joining us.
Gordon.
We want you on every day, I think we should decide now.
Well,
you just come and sit in here.
Scoop getter. I was then going to describe Gordon as the Jack Grealish of the team, but I can't do that either.
You've described him as many things in football.
Who would you like to be described as a Newcastle fan?
It's been a very long time since I wore a headband.
You want to be the Alan Shearer, don't you, Gordon?
Well, of course.
Natch.
Well, David Tennant spoke at the British LGBT Awards, where he won an award for Celebrity Ally. And what he said has become really pretty controversial.
That acknowledging that everyone has the right to be who they want to be and live their life how they want to live it, as long as they're not hurting anyone else, should merit any kind of special award or special mention, because it's common sense, isn't it? It is human decency. We shouldn't live in a world where that is worth remarking on. However, until we wake up and Kemi Badenoch doesn't exist anymore, I don't wish ill of her, I just wish her to shut up.
Well, Kemi Badenoch, who is Women and Equalities Minister as well as Business Secretary, hit back on X, formerly known as Twitter. She posted the following: I will not shut up. I will not be silenced by men who prioritise applause from Stonewall over the safety of women and girls. A rich, lefty, white male celebrity so blinded by ideology he can't see the optics of attacking the only black woman in government by calling publicly for my existence to end. Tennant is one of Labour's celebrity supporters.
And after Kemi Badenoch's response, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, then also posted on X. He said, freedom of speech is the most powerful feature of our democracy. If you're calling for women to shut up and wishing they didn't exist, you are the problem. And then from the other side of the debate, Dawn Butler, the Labour MP, also a black woman, she said, not all black women think the same. I agree with David Tennant. So what started at this celebrity event, LGBT Awards, has become this very uncomfortable and unpleasant conversation because of the words, frankly, that David Tennant started this discussion with.
I just don't get where Dawn Butler's coming from on this, because the one thing we can agree on, I would have hoped, Kamal, is that no woman, regardless of whether she's black or white, she's in government, she isn't, should be told to shut up by a man simply because he doesn't agree with her. Where have we got to with public discourse and debate in this country if we've got somebody of his celebrity and esteem saying that women should shut up? Why aren't men ever told to shut up and go away? I mean, it's so insulting. It also speaks so much to the absolute hypocrisy of the so-called progressive left. If you don't agree with me, then it's not just that you're wrong, but that you should shut up and disappear. So this man appears on a platform apparently advocating equality for all, and yet as a straight white man thinks that he can silence Kemi Badenoch as a strong black woman simply because she takes a different, more gender critical view. I think shame on him. I'm really angry as a woman about what this bloke has got up and said on that stage.
I think as well that this idea of this person shouldn't exist, it's that extra turn of that screw. Not just shut up, but also you shouldn't even be kind of there. And he then went on to sort of say, oh, I don't wish her any ill will. But why are you talking in that way? I generally don't understand it. I hope, Camilla, that it's not all people who would describe themselves on the progressive left. There is certainly a strand on that side of the debate that have become so ideological. It's ideologues on either side. I think exactly the same from the progressive side as I would say about the Faragian side. Ideologues who are constantly screaming about freedom and rights and equality and people should be able to say what they want to say and be themselves, are constantly shutting down the people they don't agree with. And when language matters, where it does so much on social media, if I think of, young women looking at people with the privilege of David Tennant and seeing what language he uses, what are they thinking? He's Doctor Who.
Yes.
Oh, that guy, Doctor Who, he speaks about women like that. So in the playground, I'm thinking, oh, well, that's how that guy does. This person is should be a role model, and that's actually, I think they get they become drunk on their
the Kool-Aid
fame
of their progressiveness.
and they lose the idea of civil debate about these important issues.
But this is intolerance masquerading as tolerance. Things that David Tennant can get on stage and comment on. 1, being David Tennant. 2, being Scottish. 3, how to wear a kilt. 4, being an actor. Maybe we could even have his expertise on time travel. Things he's not qualified to comment on. Women's protection of women-only spaces. This is the other thing that's offensive about this. In what world does he think he can dictate to women what women think about their own female-only spaces being used by males? Well, I don't understand this. It's like,
I think we need to be careful about saying what people can and cannot speak about.
he can speak about anything, but he can't speak in that tone about a woman who is the Woman and Equalities Minister. He thinks he knows better than her.
He should never use that tone. The whole argument around the treatment of trans people and how they should be supported is something that people should be obviously allowed to talk about. And I know you're not saying that, but I don't think we should put constraints around what people are allowed to talk about in certain areas. It is important for people who are famous to be able to lean into important debates, and that can be helpful to people to see those debates happen. The debates can't just be had by politicians and experts in certain areas.
Sure, although
but I think your tone is right. I think
it's using award ceremonies as platforms to make these kind of political statements, which I think most people find quite objectionable.
Yeah.
If they are actually advancing the debate, round of applause, brilliant, let's get stuck into this. But if they are just being frankly abusive to others in a very childish way, that does nothing for the discussion.
Kemi Badenoch has lent in. Let's move on to some of the more sort of just the politics of this, maybe with a small p, but I think the language is appalling and everything. But the politics of this, funnily enough, for Kemi Badenoch actually are very powerful because she's scratching away at a sore that Labour know they have. Labour have been in a certain position on trans issues which have been unsustainable around gender recognition and around beliefs of people who are going through gender dysphoria issues. They've had to move rapidly, and Kemi Badenoch knows that journey is not finished. And in an interview, our health editor, Laura Donnelly, she did an interview with Wes Streeting, who is presently the Shadow Health Secretary, but obviously, given the polls, very likely to be the Health Secretary after July the 4th. And he did admit that the party, the Labour Party, needed to regain the trust of women because of positions they have taken, which now seem really out of date. Let's just hear a bit of that interview.
I think we're finally in a good place on this issue. I think the Labour Party has shown during this election campaign that we're the only party that's capable of bringing people together and seeking to solve challenges rather than exploit them, and of, I think, showing a real commitment to making sure that at the same time as we are trying to give trans people the care and the respect that they deserve, we are also resolute in our determination to protect women's spaces, women's voices, and women's rights. I think it's taken us a while to navigate what has been pretty complicated and at times toxic debate. And I think that J.K. Rowling's comments over the weekend reflect that there's a lot of work to do to earn trust on this issue, and that clearly there's been a lot of hurt. So I think we are in a position at this election where we have got, I think, a very confident position, but where we have to show some humility also, that it's taken us quite some time to get to what I think is ultimately a good position, not just for the Labour Party, but more importantly for the country.
That does sound like you do think that Labour has been on the wrong side of history in recent years.
Well, I think the challenge is we've been trying to do the right thing on this issue, but sometimes, in pursuit of inclusion, you can end up excluding or alienating people. And I think in an NHS context, about the well-meaning but totally misguided approach that said we would write women out of NHS guidance and start referring to people with cervixes in relation to cervical smear tests, or birthing people instead of mothers, which I think is just kind of dehumanising and degrading language. And, and that's happened, by the way. I mean, I think there's plenty of humility to go around on this issue. That's happened on a Conservative government's watch. So I don't think these problems are entirely a challenge for Labour. I think there's been a challenge right across the political spectrum and across our public services. I think the important thing, though, is that we focus on bringing the country together, being honest about the fact that there are some tensions and there are some thorny issues to work through, and approaching those issues with the humility, the care and respect that this discussion deserves. I never want women to feel silenced when it comes to speaking up about their rights. I never want trans people to feel beaten up by headlines or policy statements. And I feel really optimistic, actually, that there is a way through on this debate that brings people together and lands in the right place where trans people feel safe and included, and women are confident that their rights and voices are respected.
I mean, I find it interesting. It's good, I think, for a politician to sort of say, look, I've changed my thinking on this because I've given it more thought. But let's not rewrite history here. Okay, Labour and the left have been in bed with Stonewall on this issue.
Just tell us, Camilla, about Stonewall for our people who don't know that.
Stonewall were the ones who said, a trans woman is a woman. That's it. You've got to accept it. And if you don't accept it, then you're a bigot and a TERF. You're this trans exclusionary radical feminist, and you deserve to go and be burnt at the stake. And on Labour's watch, we can have criticisms of the Tory government. I've made many in my columns over the years about how they've been asleep at the wheel as women's rights have been slowly eroded on their watch. I get that. But let's not forget that it was Sir Keir Starmer who, in response to the Labour candidate, Rosie Duffield, saying that only women can have a cervix, responded with, that's not right. And we were made to feel that we were the ones who were being intolerant. So J.K. Rowling has a point. They're scrambling now because the Harry Potter author has said that she doesn't feel at this stage she can bring herself to support Labour, having been a member and indeed a donor in the past. So that makes things very awkward for Streeting. I don't feel particularly convinced by Labour's positioning on this. The manifesto is really woolly. They're saying they don't want to bring in self-identification, which was what has been proposed in Scotland under Nicola Sturgeon, by the back door. But at the same time, they're willing to make it easier for people to get a gender recognition certificate on the basis of a diagnosis of gender dysphoria by one doctor rather than two, as has been the case. I think, as is ever the case, Labour are turning in both directions. On one hand, trying to look moderate and appeal to people like me, but on the other, keep their Stonewall fan base happy.
And that is why I think Kemi Badenoch is picking away at this, because she can see the weakness in Labour's position. I'm very glad to hear, Wes Streeting talking with sympathy about trans and the pain and discrimination that many trans people have faced in this country. That is good to see. But where he's wrong is the opening of that. We did it as a lengthy quote, and I think it's really important to have that context in this discussion. But where he's wrong is your point, Camilla. This is not settled in Labour. And there is real tension within the shadow cabinet, within the Labour leadership on that issue. So Labour has taken some steps to, as you describe it, Camilla, appeal to those people who, want proper rights for women, but they still haven't completely made their peace with you, as you say, that side of the debate, which has been led by Stonewall so aggressively.
It's time to talk about the football, Gareth Southgate's coaching, the team. Is it a team? Can a team of champions ever beat a champion team? Seems not. 0-0 draw against Slovenia. Thom Gibbs watched it all. He joins us now from Dusseldorf. Tom, I'm just looking at our own headline. England limp through. It was a bore draw.
It was no fun, was it, Camilla? I did not enjoy watching England, and I have not really enjoyed watching England at this tournament, apart from portions of the first half against Serbia. Unfortunately, it feels like such a throwback to tournaments from before Gareth Southgate arrived. The 2010 World Cup is especially sticking out for me, where we actually had Slovenia in our final group game at that tournament, coming off another really terrible draw against Algeria at that tournament. And we at least managed to beat Slovenia that time, and there was really little hint of that last night, unfortunately.
Tom, is my husband right, along with, I think, more or less everyone watching, when they say and think to themselves, I could do a better job at managing this England side than Gareth Southgate right now?
Hard to say, Camilla, without seeing his CV, or at least his football manager saved games.
He did manage my son's junior football team for several years with great success.
Did anyone throw their cups of beer at him after the gagames?
No, they were pleased with how he did it.
Yeah, those are his credentials right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think let's be honest. The vast majority of people have now turned on Gareth Southgate. There's a poll on the website, our sport pages at the moment, which I looked at just before starting, which said 86% of our readers believe his time is up. There is still a little portion of people who I think have a little bit of hope that maybe things will turn around, and that Southgate's general excellence over the past 3 tournaments he's been in charge for does buy him a little bit more grace than he was on the end of last night. But the appetite is there for change now, I think. Let me just
put the other side, just the other side. That's often my role in this wonderful podcast that we work together on, Camilla. Mm-hmm. A couple of positive comments from a couple of our readers. Colin Sams. No matter how badly you thought the team and or the manager played, you do not boo or throw glasses at them, paper cups. If you're a true supporter, you get behind the team and support. The team is you and you are the team. But then Michael Pryor, I think, is maybe slightly more, not where I am. I watched last night and it was terrible. And you do wonder how we can have such great talented players, but such a mediocre looking team. But Michael Pryor says, great start by England, Tom. Top of their group without any alarms. All that matters is the result. And if you continue with the same approach and win, then all will be forgiven. Get behind and support the manager. Now, Tom, you've been doing lots of these things. I remember that last Slovenia game in 20. Didn't we score in the 94th minute, I think it was. Do you think that Gareth Southgate can say, well, look, hang on a minute, top of the group, we're through. We're in the much easier side of the draw. We don't know until tonight, so after this podcast is being recorded, who will be playing next, but possibly the Netherlands. We're doing okay.
Absolutely, he can make that argument. It doesn't chime with where the public are on Southgate. He does have a very good point when he says he does not see the same sort of reaction among the tournament from fans whose team have just qualified for the knockout stages. And the format of this tournament now with 24 teams is such that teams can win a tournament without looking very good for quite long portions of it. Portugal in 2016, who won the European Championships, didn't win a game in 90 minutes until the semi-final when they got Wales. They didn't win the final in 90 minutes. They needed extra time. They drew all 3 of their group games. It's wild that England can be this poor and be this dispiriting and upsetting the country so much, and yet absolutely they can go on and win this tournament potentially. And no one will be thinking about this if indeed we do squeak past whoever we're playing in Gelsenkirchen at the weekend, which looks likely to be the Netherlands, which is not easy, but we've come through harder tests before with Gareth Southgate's England.
I get the whole a win's a win mentality, but this bloke has got one job. Okay, he's got this team of brilliant players. There's been problem with the selection and the starting. There's been problems with the positioning. I don't think he's particularly inspiring as a leader. I was speaking at the pub the other night with somebody who said he was offered a free ticket some time ago to an evening with Gareth Southgate at Wembley. He said it was literally one of the most excruciating experiences of his life. What is Southgate's pedigree, bar missing that penalty back in the day? I'm sorry to be cruel, but it's like if I was Jude Bellingham and I was listening to Southgate in the dressing room, I'd be thinking, why am I taking instruction from this guy? There's an argument to say he shouldn't even still be managing because we should have beaten Italy at the last Euros. He's been eulogised by this Dear England play by James Graham. You know, so now he's become sort of slightly untouchable. This is preposterous.
Tom, tell us about the fans. I'll let that just sit there for the Southgate family to digest Camilla's analysis of his abject failure, which I don't quite agree with. I think he's done well in tournaments for us, much better. Not since the 1960s have we been at the sort of levels we've seen in the last few years. But Tom, what about the old England fans? You're there in Germany. You're travelling around with them. Are we a peculiarly dour bunch that are miserable about our team, or is it actually very similar for all fans? Like, in France and in Italy, the discussion is pretty aggressive as well about their performances so far.
I think with international tournaments, it comes down to expectation and pedigree, and the fans who are most negative are often the ones with the highest expectations. So I think France's fans have been notably slightly muted because they've had it so good in the past decade under Didier Deschamps. England have not had it so good, but also have come into the competition with a lot of expectation. For the first game, I watched it in the fan zone in Gelsenkirchen, and the split there, I would say, between the fans I spoke to was about what it was at home. There was a mild majority, I would say, there of people who were pretty anti-Southgate, but there was also recognition of everything he'd done, and even a feeling that he probably deserved this extra tournament to see if he could finally get England over the line. I think what we're seeing is something we see again and again in football, that people do have a limited shelf life. Your message, which can be very, very innovative to begin with, stops getting through. And I think what we need is something we have in politics, which is term limits on England managers. I really don't think anyone should be doing more than 3 tournaments, and this is Southgate's 4th, and it is a bit capped in hindsight to say it's one tournament so far, but that is how I feel about it at the moment.
Yeah, maybe I'm still smarting at the absence of Grealish. I've got to be honest about that.
His legs much to be looked at.
I'm still not quite over it, and I need to perhaps get a grip.
Tom, Gordon Rayner, who we had on the podcast a little earlier, big Newcastle fan, he said, what is the point, Mr. Southgate, as he left our studio, of putting Anthony Gordon on for, 3 minutes, 4 minutes?
Or not starting with Cole Palmer.
Yeah, Southgate's at this point in the life cycle where everything he does is wrong, and people are going to pick up on all sorts of things that happened last night and say, what is he doing? Because that's just how it works. a tight, a fortunate England goal would quieten a lot of those feelings. And yeah, there's lots of questions you can ask. I mean, Conor Gallagher coming into the central midfield to partner Rice did not succeed. It looked worse than when Trent Alexander was there. Trent Alexander-Arnold was there previously. Kobbie Mainoo looked an improvement in central midfield, so that was a small positive on a pretty negative night. Sam Wallace has written brilliantly last night about how Foden and Bellingham don't seem to be able to play in the same team, but it's a very, very tricky thing for a manager, because if he drops one of them, it's like...
Thank you so much, Tom. Gareth Southgate, the Rishi Sunak of football, it looks like at the moment. But let's hope for better things as we come to the round of 16.
Thank you, Tom. Can I just say something else that's slightly irritated me about Southgate? I get the whole he's abandoned the suit and the waistcoat for the knitwear. Why is he just wearing the same top every game?
Maybe it's his lucky top.
Well, it's not that lucky. Okay, he's finished top of the group, a win's a win and everything. By the way, I'm noticing that you are wearing shirts.
Oh, I feel something coming on here. What's coming on here?
I'm just saying, are you finding your woolen wardrobe a little bit tricky to navigate in this heat?
The light knits in 30 degrees temperature are quite tricky for men. We've discussed this. There is no easy wardrobe for men of a certain age, of certain vintage, to wear comfortably during the shoulder months of spring and autumn, but also during
But
summer.
you're worried, I think, about short-sleeved knits
I am. I would
in
like.
the studio. I'm happy with it.
Who was one of our wonderful listeners who wrote in from Belgium, I think
Yes.
it was, who was asking for tips and things. So I'd love that conversation to continue, which is, what do men wear who wear light knits through the winter and autumn and spring months? What do they wear? I think that short-sleeved light knits can send the wrong signal of seriousness. I've genuinely been pictured in the Daily Mail in short sleeves, suggesting when I was a senior executive at BBC News that I therefore wasn't taking the announcements we were making seriously. And that's gone to my heart.
Well, I'd like to see your summer knit wardrobe.
Okay, we may try it.
Unveil it, and we can make a judgment on the Daily Tea as the days progress in this sunshine.
I would love.
Don't be shy.
I want everyone who listens in to just give me, they can just give me some feedback. Also,
you're in that shirt because tonight you're going to the last debate between Sunak and Starmer, and you're going to report back on that tomorrow from the spin room.
I will be there, the last head-to-head, but actually really important as the first head-to-head, because lots of voters we know don't actually engage in the campaign until it gets to decision time. We know that postal voting has already started, but the actual big decision on July the 4th is now just over a week away. So this final debate in Nottingham, the final BBC debate, Rishi Sunak versus Sir Keir Starmer, I'll be there, and we will discuss in detail tomorrow how the two men performed.
Back tomorrow with that and more at 5 p.m.